section that we stopped in, and I think it was chapter 3, right? Yes. And thank you for subscribing. Let your friends know about the channel. Fox Lake was about 45 minutes outside of Chicago, and in so many ways, Daddy's description of it was right. The woodsy fishing resort reminded me of, somebody sent me the pronunciation of this, and I'm sorry I didn't memorize it, but it's not Valsjaben. It's like, blah, I don't know. It's German sounding. But the fishing resort reminded me of where Ann-Margret came from. It even boasted more than a dozen transplanted Swedes, including relatives like Auntie Mina and Uncle Charlie, who had moved back from Sweden again, as well as Aunties Gerda and Gurnella, their husbands and children. So there was just one difference between Fox Lake and Valsjaben. It wasn't my home. I felt strange and comfortable out of place. You see, I missed Mufa and Muma, Uncle Callie, and all my friends, and I sobbed every day for the first few weeks. At first, I felt that the only good thing about moving there was being a family. Well, the one-bedroom home on Hickory Street and Lake Avenue we moved into had the feel of a dollhouse. Mother and Daddy took to the bedroom, and I slept on a pull-out cot in the living room. See, Daddy lived in Chicago during the week because the commute was too long and too expensive. We saw him only on the weekends, and I'm sure that this was very hard on Mother. In fact, I had no idea of the extreme homesickness that she felt. She was only 27. And battling depression, which made her sick and prone to fainting spells throughout most of the first year. Now, leaving Valsjaben was like ripping her heart out. Now, I suppose Mother was a lot like I was later on when I became involved with Roger. Daddy was more worldly than Mother and more experienced and more mature, and Roger was certainly more worldly than I when I started dating him. Both Mother and I were looking for father figures, men who would take care of us, even if, in her case, that entailed a sacrifice. Now, it was 2 years before Mother felt somewhat settled. By then, we were able to move into a green and white 2-bedroom home on Lake Avenue, and it seemed just perfect for us. It had a screened-in porch. It had a dining room, had a basement, a kitchen, and a big old backyard. I even had my own room, plus Mom and Daddy saved enough money to buy a piano, which we put in the little room off of the entry. Once again, music filled our home, as it had in Valsjaben, and gradually, Fox Lake began to feel just like home. Although I know it must have still been very tough for my mother, I never heard her complain, not once. I was the same way, and while I dreaded the fear and nervousness of starting a new school, I kept it to myself. See, the other children were very kind to me, fascinated because they had never met a kid from a foreign country who couldn't speak English, but I felt awful inside. I didn't understand a word of their language, and I felt lost. Still, I didn't protest or gripe. Well, that would be why she grew up so shy in the States. She was certainly not shy in Sweden, dancing and singing for the soldiers and telling them not to cuss, not to say bad words. She comes here, my gosh, sure, she might have been a pretty little girl, but she didn't know how to speak, she didn't understand anything. That's going to put you behind. But also, it also made her, let me tell you something about famous people. Famous people aren't coddled when they're young. They're not given a lot of stuff. They're not taken care of really well. They become famous normally because they had nothing, or because they desired attention and love, and so they worked at it, at something so hard to be famous so they could be adored by everybody. That's the difference normally between famous people and people that are not famous. So, still I didn't protest or gripe. That just wasn't the way the Swedish children behaved. Just as you're taught never to boast, you're taught to grit your teeth and trudge ahead in the cold, knowing that warmer days will eventually come. So in my second year of school, I won my first spelling bee, a measure of how hard I pushed myself. And Mother watched out for me. See, at this young age, I could have suffered emotional damage from being the outsider in a strange culture, had Mother not helped make me friends by signing me up for dance lessons at the Marjorie School of Dance. Now, although it was a financial stretch, she felt it was very important. Marjorie Young was a great teacher who managed her class by teaching traditional dance rules of patience and strictness. From the first day, I loved class and took to it with a natural ability. Now, if I couldn't understand exactly what she said, I simply mimicked every move and gesture that she made. That's true. That's one thing about dancing, is that it doesn't take any work. If you can imitate, and if you get rhythm, you gotta have rhythm. You know what I'm saying? You can learn to mimic, but if you don't have that natural internal rhythm, it can be a bit clunky. But I think almost everybody can learn how to dance. After dance classes, I hobbled home in pain. Mother winced at the sight of my aching, sometimes bleeding feet and asked, "Do you want to quit?" My answer never varied. For me, the payoff was too great. At my first dance recital, 2 boys carried a large basket on stage. Then I popped out of it in a bright yellow tutu and belted a saucy rendition of "It Takes a Long, Long Train with a Red Caboose to Carry My Blues Away." I have no idea how that song goes, but the next year I tap danced and sang "Quanto Le Gusta" while wearing a bright green and white satin skirt and a high floral headpiece that transformed me into a 7-year-old Carmen Miranda. It was the start of my glitzy outfits and elaborate stage act, thanks to my mother. For each recital, she stayed up half of the night, sewing my costumes with exacting precision, attaching thousands of tiny beads or sequins until her eyes hurt, determined that I'd never have to be without, even though we couldn't afford it. Now, when I was 10 years old, we returned for a visit to Sweden. Since we were staying for such a long time, my mother first got permission from my 4th grade teacher for me to miss school. Her stipulation was that I keep a diary of the trip. Now, Daddy remained behind to work, and Mother and I set out that early in May. Our trip began in Orange-Kolsvik, something like that, Daddy's seaside hometown. Then it was on to Valsjaven, which is not how you pronounce it either. I'll work on that. Or maybe y'all can even educate yourself and just type in, how do you pronounce Valsjaven? Valsjobyn. Vals, job, Y-N. That's how an American would say it, but I'm not Swedish. Where I made a diary of notations about climbing mountains and running among cattle and goats, playing with cousins in haystacks and taking day trips with my aunties and uncles into neighboring towns. The pièce de resistance came when my Uncle Callie invited me to ride on the back of his motorcycle. See, he had a BMW, bike that seemed really large and powerful to a 10-year-old. The sound of the bike's motor throttling up and down the roads was thrilling. I couldn't imagine anything more exciting than climbing on the back and feeling the surge of the engine and wind in my face. I begged him to take me for a ride. But when my uncle took the bait and suggested we go for a spin, my mother hesitated before giving me permission. She wondered if it might be too dangerous for a 10-year-old girl. Yet, she was something of a daredevil herself. Daddy had owned motorcycles, and they had sped along these very same roads. Uncle Callie, outfitted me with a cap and goggles, and then I climbed on the back of his motorcycle. We raced through the outskirts of town and crossed over the border into Norway. Uncle Callie drove fast, and the ride was tantalizing. In the back of my mind, I knew that I had to actually drive that motorcycle. As soon as we returned, I asked Mother if I could get a bike of my own. She laughed. It would be a long time before I ever bought one of my own, but I never forgot that first ride. Years later, I would roar around the canyons of Los Angeles on my motorcycle, a blithe spirit. In fact, this love of speed and danger is a side of me I may never truly understand. I'm sure that on some level, I'm reacting to my repressed upbringing, to the good little girl side of me. I suspect I have a deep need to break free of that. And courting danger is how I express it. So, I promised a little bit more. We're going to keep reading this book. Sorry I can't read any more than that. I just don't have the time. Or I would do it. I would read more. So perhaps the next time I read, if I don't trip over this trombone below my feet, I'll read more, you know, 20, 25, 30 minutes of it, something like that. So sorry, not trying to tease you. I just don't have the time. TCB TLC, find me over at Rare Elvis Photos. And of course, thanks for joining me here at Elvis and Legends.